Picture a harbor in the cold, grey light of a Scottish morning. Leith, just outside Edinburgh in the first weeks of the year, and the wind coming off the water has teeth. And yet the quayside is crowded, and the crowd is happy. There is a ship at the dock, sails ready, and a line of people waiting to board her, whole families, with children, with trunks and tools and their best clothes folded carefully inside. A cobbler has sold his shop. A young clerk has spent his savings and his father's blessing. There are farmers and a doctor and men who were promised commissions in an army and men who were promised land, good, black, fertile land, in a warm and gentle country across the sea, where the rivers, they've been told, run over sands flecked with gold. They are emigrating. They are going to a place called Poyais. They have bought land there. Some of them have bought government offices there. They have exchanged their solid British pounds for the crisp new currency of a country most of them cannot quite find on a map, and they've done it gladly because they are certain, absolutely certain, that they are sailing toward the best decision of their lives. They are wrong. Every single one of them is wrong, because the country they have bought into does not exist. There is no Poyais. There is no capital city waiting for them, no port, no bank, no opera house, no fields ready for the plow. There is a stretch of empty, fever-ridden jungle on a coast on the far side of the world, and a great many of the smiling people on that quay are going to die on it. And it was all sold to them, the land, the titles, the currency, the dream, by one man, with a made-up crown and the most magnificent, most monstrous nerve in the whole history of the con. Come here. Let me tell you about the man who sold a country that was never there. The name's Eddie. I'll be your guide through this one. And I have to warn you right at the top that this is a strange story to love. And I do love it, in a way that keeps me up some nights wondering what's wrong with me. Because I collect cons the way other men collect stamps or old coins. I go looking for the audacious ones, the beautiful ones, the schemes so brazen they stop looking like crimes and start looking like works of art. And on the sheer, dizzying scale of the lie, I have never, ever found one bigger than this. My mate Sully, who half listens to me go on about these things over a pint, says the mark of a truly great con is that you can't believe anyone fell for it, and you can't believe anyone dared try it, both at once. By that measure, this is the greatest con there has ever been. A man did not sell a bridge he didn't own, or a painting he didn't paint. He sold a country he had invented out of thin air, its geography, its government, its history, its money, to thousands of people, some of whom got on ships and sailed toward it. So sit with me a while. I'm going to walk you through how he did it, step by step, because the how is genuinely breathtaking. And then because this channel has a rule, and the rule is that we never, ever forget the people on the other side of the trick. I'm going to make you stand on that jungle beach with the ones who believed him. Both halves. That's the deal. So who was he? His name was Gregor MacGregor, and here is the first thing that makes this story so much more troubling than a simple swindle. He was not a nobody. He was not some back-alley grifter with a cheap suit and a fast tongue. He was a real man of real, if wildly exaggerated, achievement, and that is exactly what made him so lethal. MacGregor was a Scot, born in the 1780s into a family with a proud Highland name and a grand military tradition. He was, so the story went, connected to the famous clan, kin to Rob Roy himself, and he wore that heritage like a banner his whole life. He joined the British Army as a young man, and then, when the great wars of independence broke out across South America, when Simon Bolivar and the other liberators were fighting to tear a continent free of the Spanish Empire, MacGregor sailed across the Atlantic and threw himself into the fight. And this part is real. He genuinely served in those wars. He led men. He fought in real battles, won some, survived some catastrophes, married into a prominent local family, and came out of it with the rank of general and a reputation as a dashing, romantic soldier of fortune, a Scottish adventurer who had bled for the freedom of the New World. Now, how much of his own legend was true and how much he'd already begun to inflate, even then, that's a matter historians still argue over, and I'll flag that honestly because I always will. He was, by every account, a genius at self-promotion long before Poyais, but the bones of it were solid enough. When Gregor MacGregor came home to Britain around 1820, he arrived as a decorated general back from the wars of liberation, a real soldier with real medals and a real foreign wife, trailing stories of jungles and battles and gold. London society ate it up. And that, my friend, is a con man's dream starting position, because the hardest part of any deception is getting the mark to believe you're somebody. MacGregor didn't have to fake that. He'd earned it. He just decided to spend it on the biggest lie anyone had ever told. Here is what he came home with besides the medals. He came home saying that during his time in Central America, on a stretch of coast called the Mosquito shore, and I want to be precise, because accuracy is the whole game on this channel. The Mosquito coast is a real place, a real stretch of shoreline along what is now Honduras and Nicaragua, then thinly settled, humid, wild, and claimed by various powers who barely governed it. MacGregor said that the local king there, the king of the Mosquito people, had granted him an enormous tract of this land, millions of acres, and on that grant of real, if barely known, land, MacGregor built something that was entirely, gorgeously false. He built a country. He called it Poyais, and he did not simply gesture at it, he invented it in loving, exhaustive detail. Poyais, he explained, was a civilized nation. It had a capital city called St. Joseph, and he described St. Joseph as a fine, established town with broad streets, grand houses, a cathedral, a domed palace, even a theater and an opera house. It had a functioning government with himself at the head, bearing the title Cazique, a native word for a prince or chief, which he adopted as if it were a crown. It had a democratic-ish constitution, a banking system, a military, a civil service with real offices you could hold. The land was fertile beyond belief, 3 harvests a year, he said. The forests were full of valuable timber and game. The natives were friendly and eager for British trade. The climate was healthful and gentle. And the rivers, this is the detail that tells you exactly how well he knew his audience. The rivers of Poyais, he let it be known, had beds that sparkled with lumps of gold, just lying there, waiting to be gathered by anyone willing to stoop. None of it was real. There was no St. Joseph. There was no cathedral, no opera house, no government, no civil service, no thriving trade. There was jungle and swamp and a couple of rotting timbers from an abandoned settlement that had failed years before. The entire nation of Poyais existed in exactly 2 places, in Gregor MacGregor's imagination and on paper, beautiful, official, convincing paper. And oh, the paper mattered, because MacGregor had come home at the single most perfect moment in history for exactly this lie. You have to understand the London he walked into. In the early 1820s, Britain was gripped by a fever, and the fever was South America. Those wars of independence MacGregor had fought in were throwing up brand new nations, one after another, all of them freshly free of Spain, all of them hungry for money, all of them suddenly coming to London, the financial heart of the world, to borrow it by issuing government bonds. And British investors were delirious for these bonds. New countries, exotic and rich in resources, paying handsome interest. Gran Colombia, Peru, Chile, Mexico, their loans sold like hot bread. Nobody in London had been to these places. Nobody could check. It was all promise and distance and the delicious scent of easy fortune. So when a decorated general, freshly back from precisely that part of the world, announced that his little nation, Poyais, was seeking a loan too, it didn't sound absurd. It sounded like Tuesday. It sounded like every other new nation bond on the market, except this one came recommended by a genuine hero who'd been there. MacGregor wasn't swimming against the current. He'd found a tidal wave already rolling toward shore, and he simply climbed onto it. Rule one of any con, my friend. You never have to invent the greed. You just have to arrive at the exact moment everyone around you is already desperate to believe, and hand them the shape their hope was already reaching for. London wanted new countries to invest in. MacGregor didn't argue them into wanting Poyais. He simply gave their existing hunger a name, a flag, and a bond certificate. Now let me show you the machinery, because this is where a lesser swindler would have grabbed a quick purse and run, and MacGregor instead built an entire, gleaming, self-reinforcing world. And I'm going to tell you the shape of what he did, not a recipe for doing it. That's the promise I make on every one of these, because the difference between admiring history and handing you a blueprint is the difference between this channel and a crime, and I intend to stay firmly on the right side of it. First, the loan. Around 1822, MacGregor arranged, through a respectable London banking house, for Poyais to issue government bonds, on the order of £200,000 worth. Let me put that in perspective. £200,000 in the 1820s was a colossal sum, a life-of-a-nation figure. And people bought them. They bought the sovereign debt of a country that did not exist, secured against the revenues of a treasury that had never collected a penny, because the bonds looked exactly like all the other new nation bonds flying off the desks that season. Same engraving quality, same confident language, same air of officialdom. A bond is a bond. The paper doesn't know its country is a ghost. Second, the land. This was the crueler engine, and the one that put real bodies on real ships. MacGregor opened offices and sold land certificates in Poyais to ordinary people, not rich speculators, tradesmen, farmers, clerks, servants, the modestly comfortable and the barely comfortable. You could buy an acre cheaply, and the pitch was intoxicating. Sell your cramped, cold, striving little life in Britain, and go and be a landowner, a somebody, in a warm and generous new world. He sold them land. He sold some of them commissions in the Poyasian army and offices in the Poyasian government. He even set up a system to change their good British money into Poyasian dollars, currency he'd had printed, so they'd have local cash ready when they arrived. Think about that final touch. He took their real money and handed them, in exchange, banknotes for a nation that was jungle, and they thanked him for it. And third, the masterstroke of the whole paper edifice, the Guidebook. Because how does a curious, careful person research a country in an age with no telephone, no photograph you can trust, no way to just go and look? They read about it. So MacGregor made sure there was something to read. A hefty guidebook was published, some 350 pages of it, a detailed and sober-sounding descriptive account of Poyais, its geography, its climate, its resources, its people, its institutions, practical advice for the would-be settler. It was credited to an author named Thomas Strangeways, described as a captain and an aide-de-camp to the Cazique. Now, historians are near certain that Thomas Strangeways never really wrote it, and quite possibly never really existed as described. The book came out of MacGregor's own circle, written to sell the dream. But to a reader in Edinburgh or London, here was a whole published book, with the authority of print, confirming everything the general said. If it's in a 300-page book, it must be real, mustn't it? And I want to stop here because you might be sitting there thinking, come on, Eddie, who falls for this? A country nobody's been to. I'd never. And I need you to resist that gently because the people who fell for Poyais were not stupid. That's the Mark who got away's favorite lesson, the one target too sharp to be fooled, the person I'm always chasing in these stories. And the hard truth is that almost nobody was sharp enough here, because the con was built precisely to disarm the clever. It was internally consistent. Every question had an answer. There was a real general with a real war record and a real land grant on a real coast. There were real bonds, trading on a real exchange alongside other new nation bonds. There was a real, thick, published guidebook. There were real offices with real clerks. Some accounts say Poyais even had representation, an agent, the trappings of a recognized state. The story didn't have a loose thread you could pull, because MacGregor, whatever else he was a world-class builder of context. He didn't ask you to believe one wild claim. He built 100 small, mutually supporting, ordinary-looking facts and let them hold each other up. That's how the good ones work. Not one big lie you have to swallow whole, but a warm bath of little truths and half-truths you lower yourself into an inch at a time, until you're all the way under and never felt the moment you went. And so, the ships were arranged. And this is where the story turns from delicious to unbearable, and I need you to come with me, because the people are about to stop being an abstraction. In the autumn of 1822, the first ship, the Honduras packet, sailed out of London carrying somewhere around 70 emigrants toward Poyais. And in the first weeks of 1823, the second ship, the Kennersley Castle, sailed out of Leith, that harbor I put you on at the very start, carrying, by most accounts, around 180 more. All told, roughly 250 souls, give or take, sailed for a country that was not there. And I'll flag, as I always do, that the exact numbers wobble a little between sources, the way they always do with events this old and this chaotic. But the order of it, a couple of 100 people on 2 ships, is solid. And who were they? That's what I can't shake. They weren't fools chasing something for nothing. They were people chasing a better life through honest work. That's the detail that guts me every time. They sold up. They said goodbye to parents they'd never see again. They packed the tools of their trades because they intended to build, to farm, to doctor, to cobble, to clerk, to make something. There were children aboard. There was, on the second ship, a man who had been made on paper by MacGregor, an officer of a bank that did not exist, sailing out to take up his grand position at a counter that had never been built. They sang, some of them, as they left. They toasted the Cazique. They were, right up until the moment the anchor dropped on the far shore, among the happiest and most hopeful people you can imagine. Hold that, because it's about to break. The Honduras packet arrived first, at the mouth of the river MacGregor had named as the gateway to civilized Poyais, and the settlers crowded to the rails, scanning the shoreline for the harbor, for the masts of other ships, for the roofs of St. Joseph, the capital, the fine town with the streets and the cathedral and the domed palace. There was nothing. There was jungle running down to the water. There was swamp. There was the hot, buzzing, indifferent green of an empty coast. No town, no port, No people waiting on a key to welcome them. No streets, no houses, no bank, no theater, no government, no anything. Just a couple of ruined timbers, the bones of some earlier abandoned attempt, half swallowed by the growth. They landed. They searched. And slowly, terribly, the truth arrived in them, one person at a time. This was it. This wilderness was Poyais. There was nothing here, and there had never been anything here. The country they had bought, the offices they'd been appointed to, the land they held deeds for, the money in their pockets, all of it was a story. They had crossed an ocean into a lie. And then, while they were still reeling from that, the second ship arrived. The Kennersley Castle, riding in from Leith with 180 more hopeful people aboard, dropped anchor and disgorged its passengers onto the same empty beach. To find the first group already there, already broken, already living in makeshift huts and tents on the shore, already beginning to understand. Imagine stepping off the boat after 2 months at sea, dreaming of your new house in the capital, and the welcome party is a group of gaunt, frightened countrymen who look at you and have to explain that there is no capital, there is no country, there is only this. What followed is the part I refuse to hurry, because everyone who tells this story for the cleverness hurries it, and it's the part that actually matters. They were stranded. Practically speaking, they had crossed the world to a coast with no infrastructure, no shelter, no stores laid in, no functioning way home, and this is the killer. No immunity to the diseases of that tropical shore. The rainy season came. Fever came. Tropical illnesses tore through people whose bodies had no defense against them, weakened as they were by the shock, the exposure, the spoiling of their hopes and their supplies at once. The doctor among them who might have helped reportedly fell ill and died like the rest. Some settlers, it said, unable to bear the collapse of everything they'd staked their lives on, simply gave up. There are accounts, and I tell you this so you feel the true temperature of it, of people who died as much of heartbreak and despair as of any fever, of the sheer psychic weight of having sold everything, sailed everyone they loved across an ocean, and delivered them all to a swamp. Eventually, word reached the nearest real authority, the British settlement at Belize, then British Honduras, along the same coast, and boats were sent. And the survivors, those who could still be moved, were carried there for whatever help could be given. But by then the damage was done, and the numbers are grim, and I have to be careful and honest with you about them, because this is exactly where storytellers reach for a single dramatic figure, and I won't. The sources genuinely disagree on the precise toll. What they agree on is the shape of it. Of the roughly 250 who sailed, something on the order of 160 to 180 are thought to have died, the majority of them from disease, from hardship on that beach, or in the desperate aftermath. And of the whole hopeful company that had set out from London and Leith, fewer than 50 are thought to have ever made it back to Britain alive. Read that again, slowly. Most of the people on that happy quay did not come home. They bought a country, and it cost them their lives. So where was the Cazique while his subjects were dying on the shore of his imaginary kingdom? Gone. MacGregor and his wife had already slipped across to France before the survivors could straggle home with the truth. And now brace yourself, because here is the detail that, when I first read it, made me set the book down and just stare at nothing for a full minute. The detail that tips this man over from brilliant crook into something my imagination genuinely struggles to hold. He did it again. In France, with the wreckage of Poyais and its dead barely cold, Gregor MacGregor set up the entire scheme a second time. New investors, new would-be settlers, French ones this time. The same invented country, the same Cazique, the same fertile land and golden rivers, the same offices and titles and currency. He tried to launch a fresh shipload of hopeful colonists toward the same empty jungle that had just swallowed the last one. This time, French officials grew suspicious before the ships could sail. Something about a large group of citizens emigrating to a nation nobody in the government had ever heard of. And the authorities stepped in and stopped it, and arrested him, and put him on trial. And here is the ending that I think tells you everything about the strange gravity this man carried. He was tried in France for the fraud, and he was, in the end, acquitted, walked free. The precise legal reasons are tangled. A co-defendant took much of the fall, and the case against the great Cazique himself, with his rank and his charm and his war record, didn't quite stick. But sit with the picture. A man engineers a fraud that kills scores of people, flees the country, immediately reboots the exact same fraud somewhere else, gets caught red-handed doing it, and walks out of the courtroom a free man. Which brings me to the question I can never quite answer, and I've decided that's the honest place to leave it, because anyone who claims to be certain is guessing. Did Gregor MacGregor know? I mean, obviously, at the level of plain fact, he knew there was no opera house in St. Joseph, because there was no St. Joseph. But there's a deeper question that historians genuinely disagree about, and it haunts me. Did he understand in his bones that he was sending people to their deaths? Or had he spun the dream so long and so hard that he'd half climbed inside it himself? Some paint him as a cold, calculating fraudster, eyes open the whole way. Others wonder whether he was a fantasist as much as a swindler. A man so intoxicated by his own legend, so convinced that with enough belief and enough settlers the imaginary Poyais could be willed into something real, that he'd blurred the line between lying and dreaming until he couldn't find it anymore. And there's the further mystery of his accomplices, the bankers, the agents, the man who signed that guidebook, the officials of his paper nation. How many of them knew it was hollow, and how many were themselves inside the dream, selling in good faith a country they'd been convinced was true? We don't fully know. I lean toward believing MacGregor knew far more than he ever admitted, but I hold it loosely, because the most frightening version of this man isn't the calculating villain. It's the one who believed his own beautiful story so completely that the corpses on the beach never quite felt like his fault. As for how it ended for him, and this is the part that still doesn't sit right in my chest, and I don't think it's supposed to. After France, after everything, Gregor MacGregor eventually made his way back across the ocean to Venezuela, the country he had genuinely fought for all those years before in the wars of independence. And Venezuela took him in. On the strength of his old service to the revolution, he was granted citizenship and a general's pension and honor. The man who had sold a country that never existed, whose invented kingdom had cost so many trusting people everything, spent his last years as a respected old soldier, a decorated veteran, living quietly on a state pension. He died there in Caracas in the mid-1840s, and he was buried by some accounts with military honors. There's no tidy justice in that, and I've stopped pretending to look for it. He didn't die broke and ruined and repentant in a cold cell. He died comfortable, honored, an old general in the sun. The settlers got the jungle. The Cazique got a pension. History does not balance its books the way the stories promise it will, and anyone who tells you otherwise is running a con of their own. And here's where I turn it around on you, because I didn't drag you across that ocean and stand you on that terrible beach just so you could shake your head at some gullible people from 200 years ago. That would be the cheap version, and you deserve better, and so do they. Because I've been asking myself the whole time I've lived with this story, what did those people actually buy? And the answer is, they didn't buy an opera house or a gold-flecked river. Not really. What they bought was permission to hope. MacGregor's real product was never Poyais. It was the feeling of a fresh start, the almost unbearable relief of believing that the cramped, striving, disappointing life you're living isn't the only one available. That somewhere out there is a warm country where you get to be a landowner, a somebody, where the work pays off and the sun shines and it all finally comes good. That's what he sold. And that, my friend, is the one product that has never gone off the market, not for one single day, in the whole history of the human race. Because think about how many times in your own life someone has sold you a Poyais, the dream job in the glossy brochure that turns out to be a swamp, the investment that's a sure thing, a can't miss, everyone's getting in, a whole confident world of documents and testimonials and impressive people assuring you it's real. The course, the scheme, the opportunity, the beautiful complete story with an answer for every doubt, that asks only that you sell the solid thing you have now for the golden thing just over the horizon. The Poyais Khan isn't a museum piece. It's the permanent structure of temptation, and it works on exactly the best part of us, not our greed, but our hope. These weren't fools. They were dreamers who trusted a confident man with a thick book and a good story. And if you think you're immune to that, then you, my friend, are the easiest mark of all. My nephew, sharp kid, I've mentioned him, thinks he's far too clever to be taken, very nearly poured his savings into a can't-lose opportunity not long ago. Slick website, glowing testimonials, a whole consistent, professional-looking world with an answer ready for every question he thought to ask. His own little Poyais printed for one. What saved him wasn't that he was smarter than those settlers. It was that, for one boring second, instead of asking the sellers whether it was real, he went and asked someone who had nothing to gain from his yes. That's it. That's the whole defense against every version of this, from a fake country in 1823 to a fake fortune in your inbox tomorrow morning. Not being clever. The clever ones drowned in Poyais. Just asking one person who isn't holding the map. So that's my question for you tonight, and I do read the comments, so come and find me down there. When was the last time somebody sold you a Poyais, a job, a move, a deal, a whole golden future that looked complete and consistent and absolutely real, right up until you got off the boat? Did you catch it in time, or did you land on the beach before you understood? And what was the one small thing that finally tipped you off the missing harbor, the welcome that never came? Tell me. I collect the modern ones as carefully as the old ones because yours are the ones that might keep the next dreamer off the next ship. Put it below. I'll leave you with this. Gregor MacGregor proved something I find genuinely chilling. That the most dangerous thing you can sell a human being is not a lie about the world, but a lie about the life they are allowed to want. He didn't have to force anyone onto those ships. They ran up the gangplank smiling, clutching their deeds to a paradise that was a swamp, because he'd handed their own deepest hope back to them wearing a crown and a flag. Half of me will always be staggered by the sheer, world-sized nerve of inventing a country and selling it. The other half is standing on that beach with the ones who believed him, and it never quite comes back. So when the next confident man offers you a warm country just over the horizon, all the papers in order, all the questions answered, do the one unglamorous thing the cleverest people on that quay forgot to do. Ask someone who isn't selling. Check whether the harbor is really there before you sail. I'm Eddie. Mind who's holding the map. And that's how you lose your shirt.